Good evening, students. This is with reference to the previous lecture on understanding the relations between science, energy, and development. I try to introduce the very a larger understanding of development as a technocratic project. Actually, it refers to the state point of view. At the same time, it also denotes the heterogeneity of actors' representation. Actors' representation of what the development means. Okay, and also it explains the dominant perspective of development. Kindly remember that I tried to introduce the dominant perspective of development to unpack the politics behind the allocation of resources. On what basis or on what grounds, rational grounds, the state allocates the resources. Okay, at the same time, we are extending this argument, the allocation of resources to whether it is need-based resources or need-based allocations, or it's a kind of an end-use allocations. Okay, whether we are trying to concern about the need of a particular sector, or we are trying to concern about the end use of a product, or end use of the resources from the individual point of view. So in order to know the conflict, a kind of an contingence between the individual or the industries or the economic development point of view. Okay, where the conflict comes, how the conflict enters into the resources allocations. So in order to understand these polarities, one need to know how the development has been introduced as a technocratic project through the heterogeneity of actors representation. The heterogeneity of actors is clearly a project the multiple groups point of view. So this multiple groups, as I've said very clearly, that it could be an industry or the government. Even for instance, it also includes academia. So this is purely one side of understanding what the development means. And we are supposed to understand the other side of the coin, that what is the implications? What kind of implications? What kind of implication this particular model incurs? Or what kind of an implication is witnessed out of this particular model? So for which we are going to understand the public point of view. the public point of view of the energy, science and development. Or the public perspective of science, energy and development. What does this term public means? As I have already explained in the previous classes, that the public is about you are trying to appear in the collective life, and appearance in the collective life. At the same time, the public also denotes common life world. We are trying to understand the common life world point of view. Okay, and just translating it into this civil society terms, public as a kind of a civil society's point of view. It's a collective of individuals, who engaged in meeting the daily needs of life. So everyone is equally engaged to meet the daily needs of life. This the representation is the point of view of the public here. That means every one of us belonging to the part of the society will be involved in meeting the daily needs of the society. But when you apply this idea, the logic of an understanding in to know what is the kind of relations which we have between the energies, science, energy and development, it falls with the first level of an understanding is that it falls under the social movements and technology. Social movements and technology. When we try to take the energy to the end consumers, or when you take the energy to the industry, okay, what kind of a conflict which is being created? That's the first understanding. Okay, you will be able to see this contentious or kind of contradictions between different set of actors in terms of, for instance, various examples, various movements one can give. For instance, it's a Narmada dam construction project, or Kudankulam nuclear power plant. Okay, or even, for instance, you can also see it in other like farmers movements, as well as you can also see in, for instance, various socio-ecological movements in India. So, on what ground these movements are coming up? Okay, what are the rational grounds? Rational grounds on which the social movements are emerging. The first point is that very, very fundamental point is that all the collective or the public which is expecting that safe and secure energy. We need the safe and secure energy in terms of clean as well as green. Now the second, the idea is that it is also like deals with the very idea of right to live a life. Right to live a life. For instance, if we set up a kind of nuclear power projects in the locality, and everybody will be in a fear. Okay, at most 24/7 they'll be in a fear. If something happens to the power plant, what happens to our life? Okay, this is the right to live life. On the other hand, whenever there is a development projects in terms of an energy development projects happens and the mass displacements happens, displacement and disintegration of community life. Community life happens. And number fourth is that violation of land rights. Land rights happens. That means it may be a kind of an forcible acquisition of land. The forcible acquisition of land happens in terms of implementing the development projects. Number fifth point is that the economic activities, everyday economic activities would be affected by the implementation of the various energy projects. Number 6 is that it is also like, for instance, these movements also criticizes maintaining secrecy. Maintaining secrecy in implementing the development projects like the nuclear power plants. Okay, on these grounds, the people participate in public participation. Public participation happens against any development projects or vice versa, the energy projects within the nation state. Why the people, on what authority or on what grounds do they participate is that these are all of the grounds. If you extend this idea is that it's the notion of the state of emergency. The state of emergency which is being introduced within the implementation of the development projects. That means, for instance, each individual doesn't know that what is going to happen when they are going to implement the development projects, whether we will be like displaced or, for instance, whether our economic activities will be like taken back or whether the disintegration of community life happens. So they have multiple questions. They have multiple questions in and around it. So when there is a multiple question in and around it, so the expectation of what is going to happen in the near future is always a kind of a question mark. So this state of an emergency, you will be like able to infer this in terms of a risk, in terms of an uncertainty, and in terms of a danger. This all are something being by default you will be able to like witnessed in the power productions or the energy productions, mass energy productions in India as well as the elsewhere also. So when you're trying to understand this, what is happening here is that this all become a kind of an energy. You will be able to see just a kind of a mere and energy and the development politics. Development politics from the outside point of view, but actually this energy and the development politics which infers a kind of a biopolitics in India as well as in elsewhere also. What is this notion of this biopolitics means? How to understand the biopolitics? I just try to bring here that what is biopolitics is. Biopolitics is about a simple strategies. It's a mix of strategies and mechanisms. The strategies and mechanisms which are being employed to, this is just a kind of an implementation of strategies and mechanism to stop the crisis or to address the crisis situation. Okay, so the strategies and mechanisms to mitigate the crisis situation is said to be a biopolitics, but there are a kind of an inherent understanding within it. Okay, so the biopolitics is you have to understand the notion of the biopolitics from the two different point of views. Number one is that we are trying to understand the biopolitics from the individual point of view. That means how an individual is able to react or able to formulate his own strategies or his or her own strategies mechanism in the context of or in the midst of the crisis or in the midst of the kind of an threat. So what kind of an strategies, mechanism individual would employ to address the threat. Always remember that this particular question is very rudimentary in nature. The logic of this reason, the logic of this particular strategies or the mechanism or the reasons are very rudimentary in nature. That the rudimentary in terms of a kind of an these engagement itself very a kind of an basic to address the basic needs or to meet the basic needs of the everyday life. So the biopolitics here directly refers to the politics behind the life sustaining, the strategies behind the life sustaining act. So one wants to maintain his own life or his or her own life in the context of the crisis situation. However, this is completely different from, for instance, the politics which is being involved or the mechanism and the strategies which is being involved to maintain the position of power or to acquire the position of power. Okay. On the other hand, the strategies and mechanism which is being involved in the reproduction of capital. Always remember that these two terms, these two are completely two different set of politics and two different set of an ideology. Then it becomes a kind of an this politics, these two are completely two different in terms of an ideology, in terms of an class. These two are completely out and out different. Okay, so if you are able to understand this, the logic behind the biopolitics of the life sustaining, the reasons behind the life sustaining, that one wants to maintain the life in the midst of the crisis, at the same time one wants to maintain the position of the power. Okay, that politics is completely different. Here, within this notion only, we are trying to understand what is this energy, how the energy is being introduced, what kind of a logics which you would like to derive. Okay, the logic you would like to derive is that the knowledge of all, through understanding all these things, you will be able to derive. Number one is that the knowledge of S&T through which development happens. Okay. At the same time, how different actors' positions are different, how different actors' interests are different. This is very fundamental to the understanding of the political economy. That means how different actors' interest varies. How different actors' interest varies in the development agenda. In the development agenda. So this is the two inferences you will be able to get from this particular understanding. On the other hand, understanding of this leads to a next level of an understanding or next level of a question. The first question, as we have tried to see, is that what kind of a class politics which is being involved in supply of energy. Okay, what kind of a class politics which is being involved? That's the first question. The second question is that the second level of an understanding of this particular engagement with science, energy, and development is that it is also the question of two different things. It is also the question of energy inequality. Okay, one is what kind of a class politics which has been, this is an extension of that argument, is that how energy inequality creates, for instance, energy stratified society. How energy inequality creates energy stratified society. This energy stratified society, in terms of number one, how the energy stratifications happens. Number one, it's an inaccessibility. Inaccessibility to different sources of energy. On the other hand, it is also reflects that inequality in energy consumption. One is inaccessibility, the other one is inequality in energy consumption. These two, basically, the energy in terms of household energy, we try to take it. For instance, we use energy for cooking as well as for the electricity. This, for these two specific purposes, we try to use energy. Okay, this inaccessibility as well as the inequality in energy consumption, it reflects different set of positions of an individual within the society. Different set of positions in terms of what? Number one is that it's a social position. It's a social position of an individual. The second one is that it is an economic position. At the same time, how an individual or a household is located in a geographical space or geographical sense. So when you understand the social position of an individual or a household, you try to see that how they are very inferior in nature. When you are trying to look at that economic understanding, the economic understanding is always in terms of an as per the income and their energy consumption would be. Higher the income, then the higher the energy consumptions are, and accessibility to different sources of energy. At the same time, it also, we are trying to understand the energy questions in terms of a geographical sense, whether the individual or a household locate in an urban or the rural. So always you will be able to see that the urban areas used to get at the most maximum of 20 hours of electricity, but if you go down to the rural areas, you will be able to see 8 hours or maximum of a kind of 16 hours of electricity. So there is a kind of a discontinuity in supply of electricity in the rural areas compared to the urban areas. So that's how we create the question of energy stratified society. On the one hand, it's clearly on the one hand, there is a kind of the threat which is being involved, the threat or the risk or a kind of an uncertainty which is being involved in the production of an energy. At the same time, In terms of a consumption, this is from the kind of a supply side point of view. At the same time, if you look at it from the consumption point of view, it creates kind of an energy stratified society. This energy stratifications in terms of a kind of a consumption. Okay, how the last individual consumers, how much she or a household consumes a particular energy, how many cylinders they use, whether they use a cylinder or a biomass or a kind of what kind of an energy sources they try to use it for cooking as well as for the electricity. So this all become a part of the question of first level question of understanding the energy politics in India. Okay, and there is the other side. There is an other side of this notion is that how to mitigate, how different scholars, for instance, especially what is the civil society or a kind of an public understanding of science here. So how one can effectively take the energy through a kind of a safe and secure means. Okay, so they developed a kind of a theory, a kind of a social theory. So that social theory is that appropriate science, the theory of appropriate science and technology. Appropriate science and technology. Okay, so the term always, usage of the term appropriate, which means it is specific. It is very, very specifically used. We use the term appropriate to a particular time, to the situation, or to the specific context. At the same time, it also, like we used to say that appropriate in terms of as per the advancement in science and technology. So we try to from this level of an understanding, we move to, for instance, according to the time, according to the situation, according to the advancement of science and technology, we say that this could be a kind of the better technology, we could use it. This you can see the reflections in the discussions, the debates between, for instance, the conventional source of energy versus non-conventional source of energy. Once upon a time, for instance, before 1980s and 1990s and all, even before 2000, you say that the solar or the renewable energy is something which is kind of highly and inappropriate, because we try to see a lack of an advancement in science and technology. The situation was not appropriate. The time is something which is more into the process of, we give a lot of investments in for instance, the conventional source of an energy, that also stopped the spread or the development of renewable energy technologies in India as well as the elsewhere context also. Now we are trying to see that this particular time is very suitable, because you will be able to see that the climate change which is happening, the environmental degradations, pollutions. So you want to mitigate. So we try to see that that renewable energy could be the possible technologies. Okay, it could be the best technologies to mitigate either the climate change or the environmental degradation. So it becomes a kind of an appropriate. So once upon a time it was inappropriate. On the other context, it becomes more appropriate. So what decides? It's a time, it's a situation, it's an advancement of the science and technology which decides which technology is the appropriate. Okay. At the same time, this is one level. The second level of an understanding, what is appropriate? How do we define appropriate, or how do we understand the appropriate? We understand the appropriate in a multiple sense, multi-dimension. Okay, the first level is that, the first aspect is that the first aspect of the appropriateness is defined in terms of social. The second in terms of political. The third in terms of economic. The fourth in terms of environment. What is social? Is that the very idea of the social is that whether that technology is available to each and every one of us. Availability of technology to everyone or all of us. Okay, it's more a kind of the social in terms of decentralized. Whether everyone is equally accessible to the technology or not. So we are trying to think that social and appropriateness from the accessibility point of view. This accessibility is whether, for instance, purely from the bottom of the society. Whether each and everyone has an accessible or not. Okay. The second idea is that the political understanding of the appropriateness is that who controls the technology? Who controls and who owns the technology? Okay. At the same time, that means this is purely from the point of view of the, for instance, whether it's the macro level productions, whether it's kind of a centralized production. Okay, suppose if there is a centralized production of power, and here the individual doesn't have any right or control to change. Okay, so that means like that it's the power which rests with one person or one individual or with the one institution. But if you look at, for instance, the appropriateness of a solar technology, if you give a kind of the solar, like the panels, distribute the panels or a kind of an SPV systems, home systems or home lighting system, each individual produces their own electricity. But at the same time, if you look at it from the macro level power productions, there the macro level power productions are, it's more kind of a centralized, the unit will be there, and centralized unit will produce the power and supply it. Okay, so the supply is in the, for instance, the production will be in the hands of one particular individual or one particular institution. Okay, so that's why that who controls it, who owns the technology. It becomes more kind of an it's a political question. Okay, so that the political question is also kind of in terms of an authority. Okay, so the next question is that what is the idea of an economic is that? The idea of the economic is that whether it is affordable in nature. What is the cost benefit of using this particular technology, okay, or using the particular resources? So the affordability, cost benefit analysis, all will be part of this understanding of what is appropriate. Okay, at the same time, environment. The question is that whether it is safe, secure, whether it's a clean and green energy. So what is appropriate is that it should be environment friendly. So that's why we are trying to define the renewable energy technologies, environment friendly technologies, the renewable energy, for instance the biomass, or even for instance the wind or the solar. Okay, so these all are something kind of renewable energy technologies which are very safe, secure, clean, green, at the same time sustainable in nature. So the sustainable, the future, okay, the resources should be infinite. We will be criticizing this in the later classes. Okay, there should be a kind of resources which are infinite. That's a very logic behind that environmental point of view as well as the economic point of view. So from the economic point of view, the resources should be infinite in nature. That infinite, if you look at it, the wind is an infinite. At the same time, the sun radiations are infinite in nature. 24/7, you get the sun radiations. So you will be able to generate the energy if you have the technology. So that becomes a kind of a highly an economic point of view. And remember this all are highly inclusive in nature. Highly inclusive. The very idea behind this theorization is that it's highly inclusive. Which doesn't exclude anyone from the technology or for the consumption of an energy. Okay, so it's more the idea of an inclusivity just being introduced within the theorization of appropriate science and technology. So how to foster this? So there is a kind of a different set of an argument which happen. How to look at this, facilitate this appropriate science and technology. That one is that to nurture the culture of science and technology at local or at the grassroots level. So this is a very idea they try to, for instance, all the people science movement, for instance, people science movements in India, or even for the scientific the communities like the scientific from the representation from the scientific communities like Amulya Kumar Reddy's, and they try to argue that we should nurture the culture of science and technology at the local or at the grassroots level, so that this appropriate science would develop. So when there is an appropriate science develops from the bottom of the society, appropriate science which develops from the bottom of the society, the development would be more equal. The development would be a kind of a more meaningful, It doesn't create a kind of a huge disparities. Okay, so the very idea is that to reduce the disparity or to reduce the lopsidedness in development. For instance, the urban areas develops very faster than the rural areas. So one need to understand that how to reduce the disparity and the lopsidedness in development. So in order to bring more meaningful for the development, this theorizations, for instance, the appropriate science and technology or the alternative science point of view were formulated during 1970s onwards. Okay. This all are something which is a kind of an alternative theory. This all are an alternative theory of development. How the development is supposed to happen. Okay, this is the other side of the coin. So from here, actually, like the point you try to understand it, we try to understand is that that the state notion, the state notion of development. At the same time, the alternative theory of development or the appropriate the science and technology theory which is project the civil society's idea of development. Actually, the energy is got. If you are able to understand the very idea of an energy production, energy production and distribution, you will be able to understand it very clearly. What are the civil society's ideas of development? At the same time, what is the idea of the state notion of development is? So this is one set of an actor. This is another set of an actor. Here I include within the state. I also include the industry as well as industry point of view. Okay, you will be able to see why I include this industry into the idea of the state point of view is that to bring the dominant views. So the very idea of the political economy is to know the conflict of interest, number one. This is the first idea, the conflict of interest between different set of different groups. So we are basically like, if you want to understand the political economic point of view, basically we need to know the logic or the reasons behind a certain act, okay, or certain theory. So this is, we try to unpack these notions. By unpacking this notion, we are trying to understand that what kind of a conflict of interest which provides in the process of development. Okay, or in executing the energy projects. At the same time, you are also trying to understand whether really the state, the government, okay, employed the principles of optimality, in production of energy to meet the development needs. Really, did the state or did the government follow the principles of optimality in the production of energy, okay, to meet the development needs? That means this particular question is that it attempts to examine this particular question attempts to examine that resources, that idea, the very idea of the resources, as well as how one would like to employ the scarce resources to meet the end, or to meet the consumer satisfaction. So here the consumer satisfaction, we divide the consumer satisfactions into multiple factors, multiple consumers are here. For instance, industry is one consumers, market, for instance, supermarket, or the households. Okay, so these all are part of the consumers. Even for instance, the government is also part of the consumers. So we are trying to meet the consumer satisfactions. Primarily, in trying to meet the consumer satisfactions, we try to look at the demand side, the highest demand. So the demand is based on who has the money power to pay the amount. The money power to pay the electricity bills. So the industry has the money power as well as the supermarkets. At the same time, if you look at that, the households, it is the urban areas, the households which located in the urban areas in terms of class representations, the upper class as well as the middle class as well as even the lower class has the money power to pay the electricity bill. So we try to supply, the government tried to supply the electricity to these, basically to these consumers rather than to the rural areas. Even within the urban areas, you will be able to put this idea of slums. Okay, where they get a kind of the electricity. They don't get the electricity for the 24 hours continuously. So we we try to look at, this is what the exact argument is, that we try to see the need of these consumers. We couldn't understand it. We couldn't look at, visualize the end use of the energy. That means we need to take the idea of the energy to the last consumer. Okay, to the last consumer, to the last consumer who may be like living in a kind of a remote areas of this nation. So when you try to think that, so it implies that is a cost. Okay, it implies that is a kind of you need to invest in infrastructure facilities. You need to like put a lot of manpower, everything we need to bring it to take the energy or to take the electricity to the last consumer. It becomes kind of a very kind of lot of an effort, lot of money, lot of things are being involved here. This actually to know this reality, to understand the very, if you don't understand the very idea of what is this development, and we will not able to unpack this. Okay, so remember, I try to just put a kind of an recollecting the point. So when you understand the idea of energy, so we are trying to understand the idea of the energy from the development point of view. So the development, I try to take it from the state point of view. At the same time, we try to take it from the civil society point of view, or the public point of view. So when you try to understand the public point of view, so you have on the one hand, there is a kind of an idea of what is this biopolitics is, and on the other hand, you also have a kind of an the very idea of the alternative, or the theory of social theory of an appropriate science and technologies. So you need both the things to understand the conflict of interest, at the same time to understand that the state employed the principles of optimality in the production of energy and development. So if you are able to answer this question, and you will be able to understand the resources scarcity. So in the next class, we will be like